There's many reasons why we can't have nice things. Whew. Sorry, I've been running back and forth for a minute. Hi, I hope you guys had a good lunch or sat in here with me for the food talk and just ate here. If you're staff, by the way, there's pizza over at registration for staff. You have to know the super secret code word. None of these are correct, sorry. Anywho, after this talk in the Lockpicking Village is Intro to Lockpicking. At 3 o'clock is Fail of Things in the Chill Out Room. At 4 o'clock, most of the contests end. That is all for schedule stuff. If you'd like to buy all of the talks on video from the conference, they are $40. You get a little flash drive. That will be available for pickup at the end of the day. So that'd be 5 o'clock when the last talk ends, because we don't have time machines yet. So talk to Todd, our AV guy here on the pedestal. It's $40 if I didn't mention that. Sorry, been running. Other than that, up next we have Katie Knowles with SMTP Security in a Changing World.
Thank you. So first of all, thanks for joining me. I know it's Sunday and I know it's really freaking cold in here. So I appreciate you braving the cold on my behalf. The past few years, I've spent some time working with mail servers and mail server security, and there's a lot of aspects about the server-to-server security that I think aren't well explained. They're a little bit tangled, they're tricky to manage. There's reasons for that, which I'll go into more detail on, but just wanted to take some time to share both information on how it all works and the story with you all today. And I think the story is going to be pretty interesting. So first of all, if anyone wants to do jumping jacks to warm up before things start, you're completely forgiven. You've got the next 30 seconds free to do that. Nobody. Okay. Let me see. So, I will not read from many slides, but I will read from this one for you. Email makes the world turn, but for all its glory, flaws, contradictions, and bolt-on protocols haunt SMTP. The security solutions we have are narrow and complicated. How did it get this bad? The tale these protocols offer is more than the story of SMTP security. This is the struggle of tragedies and triumphs that befall any generation of network practitioners. So that's the teaser. The overview, we're going to go through how SMTP works from the beginning, from the first RFC. Some of the first elements that came into play in locking things down, making sure we know who's talking to who, and then the verification wars, as I've been thinking of them. There's a lot of different protocols in who's talking to who, and there's a lot of different debates on what the right way to do that is. Following that, we've got some, warm-hearted attempts to tie together the mess that happened before it, and a little bit about the future, and maybe we can end on a hopeful note in spite of the bloodshed we have before us. About me, I am a blue team warrior by day whose thoughts and opinions do not represent those of their employer. I am an InfoSec explorer by night. I used to be an engineering degree student, and then I found a lot more fun in information security. And I am a tortured soul MTA administrator who has had to explain these concepts to 2 people in a machine shop and fairly significant organizations as well. So, the beginning. It's 1981 is when the first draft was published. RFC was 1982, but from Marina del Rey, right near, that little nest of ships and boats. You've got a beautiful view from the office, I'm sure, and someone said, we've got all these email protocols, let's make a new one. And we're not going to go into too much detail on, what made that one better than the others, but it was born, I imagine, on a sunny day since it was Los Angeles, and a simple objective, which was just transfer mail reliably and efficiently. And we all know that goes great for security. So the internet is small, dreams are big, There's not too many people to talk to yet, and we've got what we've got. It's a good time. So for those of you who are newer to SMTP or haven't ever looked into the basics of it, it goes something like this. The sending server is going to open a connection to the receiving server. The receiving server is going to say hello, one L, just HELO, and it's going to introduce itself. It doesn't actually matter what it says, though. Usually only the first few letters of that command matter. And the sending server will introduce itself as well. Oh, that's the one that does the hello. That's all right, though. So we've got the 220, the hello. We've got a 250, hello, example1.org. They'll say who the message is from. The receiving server will confirm. They'll say who the message is to. Usually the receiving server will check up, make sure that's someone they actually will send mail to. And it'll be all right. Once we've got that figured out, we've got some data to send, and the data is a message. And in this case, the message is from Alice to Bob, as in all time. You've got the subject, hi Bob. Bob, this email is amazing. And since it's some early days and some simple days, the way that we end our message is with a single dot on a line. And this is a completely plain text protocol. So, if you're ever feeling lonely on a night, you're not sure what to do, you've got the whole internet before you, you've got Netcat or Telnet, you can do what I definitely don't do when I'm lonely. No, not at all, I'm perfectly sane, and you just go talk to a mail server. You can have these conversations, they'll talk to you. Some of them say different things after the 250s. They can say whatever they want. Another important thing to note down the road is that the from within the message body doesn't necessarily have to match the from up here. And that's going to lead to the root of a lot of our issues down the road. So there you have it. We've got the basic, classic email exchange. Somewhere a little bit after that, we're starting to get some encryption, some handshakes, some good things going on in the internet, and maybe we don't trust the guys along the line. Maybe we think whatever we're emailing from, we're going through a rather unfortunate nation where people like reading other people's mail, or casual snooping from service providers, and so we'll get a handshake in the middle of that. This also meant that we needed service extensions. So, we've got a protocol and it works like this, but we need to provide the option to have other elements in that, handshake, communication, and passing back and forth of mail. So now we've got something like this. We've got we'll say the connection's already open, receiving server says they're ready. This is the fun part. You may notice the sending server has developed an accent. That is not a typo. It says "hello" now. I'm not going to try to imitate its accent. It would be unfortunate for me. Would someone like to try for me? Perfect, thank you. And that accent actually means I'd like to see your options, which is, obvious. When someone approaches you with an accent, it means you need to show them your SMTP options. You'll also note that we've got some silliness going on with the receiving server now. This is an example of a legitimate 250 mail banner that exists on specific mail servers. It says, 250, mail.example1.org offers a warm hug of welcome. Yes, it does make me feel, one would feel special being greeted that way. So in this case, our sending server has received its hug of welcome. It feels accepted. It's comfortable transferring mail. It's a good time. And the receiving server says, I've got some options you can use as well. I've got start TLS. If you want to encrypt stuff, we can figure that out. I've got enhanced status codes, which we won't go into today, but hey, sounds new, sounds shiny. I've got 8-bit MIME encoding. And I've got a maximum attachment size of, however many bytes. And, any number of things can go there. It's just sort of a way of saying, here's the menu. You want to use any of these things. These are my add-ons. And the sending server says, yeah, I don't trust anyone. Start TLS, let's go. Receiving server says, go ahead, let's, come on. They figure out a cipher, they do the TLS negotiation. It's pretty similar to a browser conversation at this point. And they start the conversation again. So once you're on that new encrypted channel, they'll do the hello example2.org again and send the data in peace. So this is awesome. At this point, we have a mail protocol, we have a way to talk to each other, and we've got a way to keep some governments out of this, or whoever's snooping on your wire. Maybe your younger brother's got a network tap. I don't know why you're running a mail server there anyway. This is amazing. We have open communications for everyone. You might notice we don't have authentication yet. We've got mail for everyone. We've got open relays everywhere. I imagine some of you are familiar with open relays. Open relays mean I've got a mail server and you've got mail. And you can send mail, and you can send mail, and you can send mail, and you can send mail for whatever domains you want. I'm just here to send your mail because this is a protocol about reliability. Let's go, let's send some mail. So we've got open spam. We've got a lot of spam. We've got people who try to figure out how to deal with spam. We've got DNS blacklists, but it's tricky. You know, we don't have a way to authenticate this yet. So maybe what we'll do is get some authentication in here and accept it's time to close the open relays a little. It's a sad time, but you know, we at least need the option for now. And that's going to look something like this. So in this case, we've got the connection is open, example 1 is ready, example 2 asks for the options. I'm only going to list the one here because we've gone over options at this point. We've got auth plain login, which sounds wonderfully secure, but hey, we've got it. Sending server is going to ask to log in. Receiving server is going to base64 encode username. And the sending server is going to base64 encode that username. Send it right over. Receiving server is going to say, okay, yeah, Alice can, you know, talk through here. We're going to do the password. Asking for the password, base64 encoded. And sending server, yeah, secure pass 123. No one's going to guess it, base64 encode it, send it right over. The authentication will succeed. Later on, there were more options to communicate this in a more secure fashion. One would also hope that maybe that handy handshake we learned before involving encryption would come into play if we're doing this kind of authentication. And we've got the authentication succeeded. I think for this model, the sending server is looking to send a message through the receiving server, as opposed to to. So this is Alice's server reaching out with a message, and the receiving server saying, you know, are you allowed to send mail through me or not? And this is what allows us to close the open relay, which just would send mail on anyone's behalf to anyone. We figured it out a little, but there's still the question of trust. You know, we've got some authentication, but we're still not sure, especially if I'm example 2 and I'm receiving a message from example 1, how do I really know that's example 1? You know, we've got certificates here at this point, but third-party mailing, mailing lists, tons of other shenanigans are happening. So that, you know, I can't just offer a certificate on behalf of a site and have that map back and forth every time. So this is the point where those headers that I mentioned before come into play. We've got what sort of, you know, I'm simplifying PRA identity here, but in general, we're looking at who's displaying as sending the message and who is envelope sending the message. And an envelope sending in this case is when we had that server 1 to server 2, you know, who's your message to, who's your message from. And then you might remember the message data itself doesn't have to match. So this one on the top is the message data. This is what you see in your inbox, and this is what your gentle, sweet, innocent users will see in their inbox. And this is the actual sender. In this case, since mailing lists are a common situation where your envelope sender isn't going to match up. In this case, one of our channel members sent out to the mailing list, so it goes over to free lists, and free lists sends it out to all of DEF CON 562 on behalf of RITs. So thinking of this a different way and translating this a different way, we've got a couple different standards to try and approach this. We've got handling just verifying that the envelope header, so where the message said it was coming from in that first handshake, matching that domain and verifying that. And then we've got the displayed, the from. These ended up being known sort of, in colloquial RFC terms as mail from, so M from, which is the envelope sender, which I really don't like because, you think mail from, you think the displayed from, right? But in this case, it's the envelope one. And then we've got the PRA identity, which is just known as PRA, and that's purported, I'm not going to try that one. Basically what it boils down to is another way to identify who sent the message. So we're going to break these down a little more. These are, a couple of standards that researchers are looking into at this point. It's about 2004, and we're trying to figure out the right way to solve this. So rolling into SPF, you are a domain administrator, and you've got some DNS records. And you point to all different kinds of things, but you're also going to basically make a bouncer list of who can send on behalf of you. And I really like thinking of the bouncer model for this, because an IP walks up to the club, and the IP is like, I've got a message, for example, too. The bouncer looks at the list, and he's like, where'd you say you were from? Some weird IP that doesn't line up. And they're like, I'm sorry, you're not on the list. And now we're going to do the action that the mail administrator has requested we perform. So basically within the text of, and I've got an example of this coming up, so if it doesn't make sense yet, don't worry about it. But within the text of this DNS record, you give every address that you trust to send on your behalf, every IP or mail server or DNS name. And then you say, if they fail, this is what I want you to do. A lot of the times it's going to end up being a soft fail, which is accept but mark, and that is the official terminology. Accept but mark. What does that mean? For a lot of people, it means nothing. For a lot of engines, it means, dock them some points. We've got fairly modern anti-spam and antivirus systems at this point, and maybe they'll bump you down from like a 90 to an 85 or something. In some cases, it means you'll get a flag for whoever's receiving the message. If you've ever seen that bubble in Gmail that says the sender of this message may not be who they claim to be, that's often a product of this. Or if you are a draconian and noble administrator, perhaps you will try to offer a hard fail. And this means pretend you never saw this message. If you see a message that claims to be from example 2, and that IP is not on the example 2 list, get rid of it. Forget about it. It never existed. Don't even think about it. Or you can have a neutral accept, which is like, HR's got services and purchasing has services, and everybody's got all these third-party services that imitate our domain. I can't get a handle on it. I don't know what to do. But hey, at least you know if they're on the list or not. So in, diagram terms, the checkup for that looks sort of like this. And at the bottom, I've got the SPF record for dc562.org. This is going to be a going theme for a little bit. And we've got, V equals SPF1, and we've got the words MX, which means we're including anything that's in the MX record, which points to your mail servers. It's another DNS record. And then we've got include for Zoho.com. So, and we're saying include whatever Zoho.com has on their SPF record, because we trust them to send as us. And anything aside from that, soft fail all, which is really common. That's okay. It's very rare for someone to be able to support a hard fail, because it means situations like that mailing list we looked at back there aren't going to work, unless we added free lists, but we can talk about that later. So in this case, we've got the sending server reaching out. Now Bob's at DC562. He changed sides, didn't like example anymore. Good choice. So Bob at dc562.org is sending to the receiving server, and he's sending from 74.201.154.33. That's where the server is. The receiving server is going to do the first lookup, and it's going to say, okay, well, what's the SPF record for dc562.org? And it comes back, and then, okay, we've got whatever's on the MX and whatever's in Zoho. Well, what's in Zoho? Let's look that up. Well, for Zoho, we've got spf.zoho.com, and we've got spf2.zoho.com. Okay, well, what's that? Let's go to the first one. Let's try spf.zoho.com. And we see we've got a range of IPs finally. We know where all their mail servers are, at least within this range, and we're going to go down the list. We're very lucky today in terms of, cycles we spend checking a message, in that we've got 74.201.154.0/24. Great. That, this IP is in that range. You're on the list, you're good. So there we go. That's the SPF elements. I'd like to say that what happened next was a polite discussion between professionals who collaborated to create a utopian society of mail that covered, the displayed from headers as well as the envelope headers. Just as a quick reminder, with this protocol, we're only verifying the envelope sender. We are not verifying the displayed from. What happened after this became known only as the Married fiasco. I'm not lying. This is what it was referred to in mailing lists and podcasts and interviews and articles for months after this happened. It was not just known by the working group name. It was very difficult to mention it without fiasco attached. So in 2004, the MTA Authorization Records in DNS working group was formed, also known as MERID. The group lasted 7 months. It fell apart amidst intellectual property battles and organizational struggles. The mailing list fell into chaos. I know this is common for mailing lists, but in this specific case as well, we had a bunch of bright, talented, thoughtful people who came together, and they were looking to refine numerous different standards. This ended up causing a fracture down the road in terms of who is organized and who is passionate and where loyalties lie. So I'm definitely not going to point any fingers with this, but whew, did I hear a ghost over there? What was that? What was that? Some say that it was entirely Microsoft. I will say it out loud. Some say that it was entirely open source folks. What ended up happening is Microsoft got a pet project, and they loved their pet project, and they took this thing called Sender ID, and they said, this is great. This is going to be our thing, and we're going to really drive this into production. We love it a lot. And you got to sign an agreement because we made it. That seems like a great idea, right, guys? Nah, no. Not really. That didn't go too well. The organizers of the working group were not too pleased with that. But Microsoft, funny thing about something being run by a professional organization, they had what seemed like a decent proposal. They had good people behind it. They had the working hours to back it up. They had a pretty coherent argument, and they had a lot of people with a lot of money behind them, which helps, just a little. And then we had the rest of the working group, which was people who were largely SendMail administrators and developers. So SendMail is a very common open source mail transfer agent, so a mail server basically. And it just didn't work out. A lot of pain, a lot of struggle, a lot of fighting, a lot of harsh words, TLDR, rampage arguments one way and the other. And you can conclude whatever you would like from it. I hope that I've managed to capture both sides of that. I can say it was quite the research project to go back and look for this. There's specifically one podcast where they interview one of the co-chairs of the working group about this immediately following what was referred to in that podcast as the Married fiasco. And archive.org did not cache it. So it is lost to the sands of time. I would love to know what he had to say. But we're left with what we're left with. So, with that pretext, Sender ID basically, the way it was produced in the end, creates some SPF record options. So it claims itself as SPF 2.0. You may recall that the first SPF was just called SPF 1. So it's SPF 2.0, sure, whatever. And basically the idea is you add some flags into that record. So if you'll remember the record of, V SPF1, and then you make the list. Instead, you say v SPF 2.0 / and you either do PRA, mfrom, or mfrom, comma, PRA. The idea here is that you can check both headers. You can specify the checking of both headers. So sometimes some folks will try and communicate that the bottom here, this SPF 2.0 mfrom, comma, PRA, is equivalent to the SPF1 record. That's not accurate. SPF1 technically only checks the mfrom, so that envelope header. How your mail server implements it could be different. It's not always consistent, but generally that's the case. And just for some flavor text, from openspf.org, the SPF 2.0 tag name is a historical accident and was assigned by the failed MARID IETF working group. Ow! Yeah, salt in the wounds, a lot of pain. I'm not going to reflect on how many arguments went behind that eventual statement, but obviously there's a lot of people who care a lot about these protocols. So, also, along with this set of protocols that was discussed around this time, is DKIM, so Domain Keys Identified Mail, which Yahoo originally spun up and it got grown into a different category that we now know today. And in this case, we are publishing what's called a selector, so basically a subdomain of a subdomain. So if I've got example1.org, I'm going to publish to whatever that selector I want to be. I can make as many as I want. I can set up as many keys as I want. This is a public-private key setup. So I can publish mail2017._domain key.example1.org. And to that address, we'll have the public key. And I'm going to take this public key, and it's going to be out there. And then on my mail server, I'm going to have the private key. And I'm going to hash the contents of every message that I send with that key so that you can look up the public key and verify that the contents have not been tampered with. You also get some niceness in that hey, another way of seeing that this actually came from me. You can define the strictness of how you want your messages to be checked. If they're going through another service, you can change that up a little bit. So there we go. A huge issue with this, though, you can't specify the action for a failed DKIM signature. You can only pass a DKIM signature. The way this has been dealt with is basically if you pass DKIM, cool, you get bonus points. What does that mean? Sure, maybe you'll get better deliverability if you send large email campaigns, if you do mass marketing. Maybe you'll have a better shot of that getting through filters. But if that DKIM fails, there's no way. You might notice there's no action you can give here. There's no soft fail, there's no hard fail, there's no accept. You're just saying this is how you know it's from me. Do what you will with it. So in message headers, as a receiving, the question was, are you entitled to throw it away if it fails? To that I say any mail server is entitled to throw away anything. Generally, failed DKIM signatures are not cause to be thrown away, but it depends, especially with large mail providers, which have their own implementations and formulas they've figured out for these things. So it's definitely not a cut and dry situation, though I wish it was. So this is what it ends up looking like in the message headers. For those of you who don't know, if you've ever looked in Outlook, there's a button for looking at mail headers. If you've looked in Gmail and done View Original, then you will see all of this, not exactly garbage at the top of your message, but we've got information like antivirus results and every server your message has touched along the way to get there, and where it originated from, and who the envelope sender was, and who signed it with DKIM as well. So this is a DKIM signature we've got up here. We've got the version of the DKIM, we've got what algorithm we've signed it with, we've got how we're signing it, which I won't go into too much depth on, but we've got the domain we're signing it with, we've got a bunch of other stuff, and then we've got the signature itself. And then we can, is it? Oh, I wonder if that is. We're wondering if it's Turing complete. Not sure. The jury is out. And in general, we're going to line up the domain so that D equals with the domain after there. So we've got a set of protocols. We move into the future. Important to note, the Merid Working Group failed to publish any RFCs. They had a lot of proposed standards, but none of them were moved into what we commonly look to now. Quietly, 2 years later, the IETF releases the RFCs in a slightly modified state from the working group, but not a huge amount, just to get them out there, just to make sure that people can start looking to them more formally. The way these things usually work, by the way, is that large mail providers will start basically honoring them and building them out before the protocols are actually out. So these things will be in production for big name mail for a few years before they start pushing for adoption among smaller mail providers or people who host their own services. They were not released as experimental so during 2006 they were actually released, but until then they were just draft, which is different. But I don't want to go too much into the details, but I could definitely, they were actually released, to my knowledge. But we can talk a little bit more after if that helps. But we still have no way to evaluate DKIM. We still have no way, and this is a big one, we still have no way to notify of SPF failures and DKIM failures. So let's say that Bob is now a mail admin, and Bob's got a big company. There's a lot of people at Bob's company, and they want to use a lot of mail services. And they might not talk to Bob before they set him up because they don't really know who he is. He's in the network closet. He does what he likes. There's nothing wrong with that. But they don't know to go to him and talk to him about what mail services they're using. So they're just going to spin up whatever they want. Bob doesn't know. Bob doesn't know that those are being used. So if they're failing SPF and if they don't have DKIM, there's no way to know. So the reason that SPF hard fail is not commonly used is exactly this. Bob could turn off that hard fail at risk of his current career, basically, is what it boils down to. He could make marketing lose their campaign. He could make HR fail to onboard someone. He could do almost anything at this point just by changing that to a hard fail, just by telling servers to ignore what he didn't approve. And he can't know. There's no feedback. It's totally blind. No one's gonna, unless someone kind reaches out, he's not gonna know. So we take another look and we create DMARC, which is a long acronym that I have at the end of this presentation that I'm not gonna bother vocalizing right now, but basically it is for tying SPF and DKIM together. So the way this works is another text record. Are you bored of all the text records yet? You know, I'll work on that. This is why it's tricky to communicate this stuff, and this is why, you might not have a clear idea of what's going on all the time when you ask, how does this server security work? So we've got another text record, which I'm sure our DNS admins are happy at this point because you're just poking them going, hey, I need another text record, okay? Just one more, please, please. Come on, security. So we've got DMARC, we've got V equals DMARC 1. And then we've got an action, which is designated by the P selector in this case. So P equals reject. So if something doesn't pass DKIM or SPF, here's what I want you to do with this. And you may notice now we've got DKIM under the blanket. It's safe, and we can say if it fails, this is what I want you to do with it. And then we've got this beautiful section right here. And what this section is where I want you to send aggregate feedback and where I want you to send what's called forensic feedback. And this is great because you've got, for aggregate reports, any participating server will send you, I don't like this part, a zip file with an XML document as an attachment to an email every 24 hours. Yeah, I was excited for a little bit. I was getting hopeful there. So anyways, and in those aggregate reports, we've got basic pass and fail data. So Yahoo's going to email example 1 every 24 hours and say, here's the mail that we saw for your domain. We saw this amount of stuff that passed and we saw this amount of stuff that failed. and here's whether it passed or failed SPF or DKIM, which is cool, it's pretty awesome, and what action we took based on what you specified. One of the interesting quirks of DMARC is that in an attempt to give admins and Bob, who is frightened but wants email security, a tool to sort of turn the knob slowly and do the frog in boiling water thing with implementing email security, is the percentage. So you can specify what percentage you want the action to be applied to for failed messages, which is, so to give you a little more background there, you can say, here's where to send the feedback, I want you to reject this mail, but I want you to do it for 50% of emails that fail. Just 50%. Just 50, that's it. You know, maybe HR's got a service, we're gonna drop half of their email campaign. And then maybe then they'll come crying to us. I find it, so I fall on the theory that you should fail and fail loudly when you're implementing these things. It's a higher risk, but you'll notice really fast, and you'll be forced to make it work. And it's great that DMARC offers this option, but it's tricky because you're gonna go 5%, 10%, 15%, and you're just kind of sitting there like some supervillain like, ah, your mail is failing. And then, you know, quietly being like, please talk to me so we can fix this. So that's sort of the premise there. We've also got the ability for forensic feedback. So you can specify if something fails, I want you to send some more detail on it. So send me the subject, send me the sender, tell me a little bit more about it so I can know, you know, if this is saying interview for candidate 1, maybe I can talk to HR. If this is saying send money to China, maybe I can know it's just someone impersonating my domain. So the way that this ends up looking in terms of a logic check is something like this. And you may notice there's more conditions in here than just DKIM and SPF. And the important, there's another element to DMARC that's called alignment. The alignment makes the leap tricky. So let's go through the left branch. We've got a message, and it's got DKIM. Cool. We're going to take that DKIM signature, and we're going to take the signing domain, and we're going to take the domain of the displayed sender, and we're going to compare them. And we're going to say, are they both example 1? So my DKIM signature needs to be signed with a key from example 1, and my signing domain, oh, I said that, and my displayed sender needs to be example 1. So displayed, not envelope. If those are the same, cool. And if the DKIM signature is okay, cool, we can deliver it. Looks good. On the other side, we've got SPF, which, are they on the bouncer list? Is SPF okay? And does the mail from, so the envelope sender that SPF checks, does that match the displayed sender? And if both of those match, we're okay. So this gives us a little more flexibility in that we have a way to set up DKIM with our HR services, our promotional mail, and we can get the signature domain to line up with example 1, and then we can get the displayed sender to line up with example 1, but maybe the envelope sender is, you know, crazypromomailservices.com, and we can make that work now, which is cool. And either DKIM or SPF, if either of those passes, it's okay. It's not an and, even if there's a failed DKIM signature on it for that domain. You know, if it's got SPF as well, it's cool. And if it fails any of these checks along the way, we're going to perform the requested failure action. So we're going to quarantine it, or we're going to fail it, or we're going to do nothing if we're, you know, just trying to get feedback right now. And then we're going to email feedback to those DMARC addresses, which is great because this means that Bob can implement his record and he can say, you know, I don't know what's out there. Let's do action none for a while, and let's just see what happens. Let's just see what feedback we get. Let's just see who we've got out there imitating us and who we've got out there, you know, who's imitating us, but they also work for us, so maybe we got to let them do that. And the situations we got to figure out. So, with this, after all of this, we finally got a way to sign our mail, check our IPs that are sending, give a consistent action for if those things fail, and get feedback so we know what's going wrong along the pipeline. So this kind of brings us to more or less the modern era The RFC for this was formally published in March 2015, but it was in development for a few years before that. And now we move in to the aftermath. I'm going to read a little bit more, but I really like these, so you'll have to bear with me for a sec. SMTP mail is inherently insecure in that it is feasible for even fairly casual users to negotiate directly with receiving and relaying SMTP servers and create messages that will trick a naive recipient into believing that they came from somewhere else. As knowledge of internet mail increases, so does the knowledge that SMTP mail inherently cannot be authenticated or integrity checks provided at the transport level. Real mail security, real mail, lies only in end-to-end methods involving the message bodies. This is RFC 5321. This is the current RFC for SMTP. This is SMTP itself. This is the core of what it is. This is what is formally considered to be known right now, that it's not possible for any of these to provide the solution we want in the end. They're broken. This then goes on to talk about how maybe, SMIME and PGP and full body mail encryption from client to client can save the day. Maybe it can. I am fully open to that idea, but there's been some difficulty in that implementation as well. One more. Merid failed because a simple, non-controversial, and all-encompassing solution to internet mail authentication does not seem to exist. This was from the IETF mailing list in March of 2005. Mailing lists are dramatic places, but I think this captured a lot of the pain very well. It's tough stuff. It's difficult. There's reasons it doesn't work, and there's edge cases that it won't work every time. And we've got all these text records just, boiling over, and we still can't say that we've fixed it. There's still issues with mailing lists. There's still issues with third-party mail services. But I do want to end on a hopeful note. What we have is not all bad. If you're an administrator and you're looking for what to do based on this, configure SPF. Look at your SPF. When was the last time your SPF record was updated? How much cruft is in that record? Publish DMARC with none. Publishing DMARC with an action of none will not do anything to hurt your mail, and you will get feedback. You will know what's out there. You will know what's passing and what's failing, and you can take a better stand against making sure that your domain is compliant and you can protect your brand. For technologists, if any of this gave you a seed of rage in your soul, if any of this made your blood boil, get out there and go tell them, in polite terms as you can. There are active mailing lists for DMARC. There are active communities always trying to improve this. They are not the same heroes and villains we started with, however you want to see the heroes and villains in this tale. But they are always trying to push this forward, and they are trying to figure out that impossible solution for what does not seem to exist. If you are a dreamer, there could be a better way, and we might need you to look at it. If you need a weekend project, there's nothing wrong with trying, right? You're not going to get sucked into the void at all by this. Don't be scared to rebuild. Don't be scared to think of new ways of doing it better. Think of how can we include people? How can we make things work? We've seen recent improvements in mobile messaging that have been pretty great. You've got client-to-client encryption, and you've got the ability to provision new devices, and sure, you've got some issues with that, but you can make it work. And it seems to be doing okay. And maybe some of those protocols could come back and help us rethink email. Because as much as we love to bash email, it is still so commonly used. Try and find me, well, no, I'm not going to challenge you to try and find me someone who doesn't, use email at all, but they are definitely far and few between, and especially outside of this room. It's tough to find people who don't rely on email every single day. So, that is what I've got. That's my final advice. If you've got any questions after this, my Twitter is @_sigil. You can reach me at Katie at knoll.es. And if you've got any questions right now, I'll be happy to answer them. You had a question.
I did. So I used to administer email and Twitter.
Awesome.
So what's your opinion currently? So currently, the current state of DMARC is that I can put a policy in DMARC and I can say DMARC enforce. The majority of large-scale mail providers will not enforce that policy. And incredibly, you say, oh, I said to enforce it. Of course it's going to work. But what's your opinion about companies like Agari, whose prime motivation in running their business is to strong-arm companies into applying a DMARC enforcement policy for their domain?
That's a very good point. So this gentleman's brought up some more heroes and villains we forgot to mention, however you want to cast the heroes and villains. The DMARC standard did have very strong funding behind it, and it has very strong corporate support by small companies who specialize solely in getting you to use DMARC. That censored DMARC feedback address back there was from one of them, in that when you are getting emails every 24 hours with zipped attachments of XMLs, you're not going to process those realistically, and these services will say, oh, we'll make that easy for you. Just give us a little bit of money, we'll make it all go away. Verified security. So it's unfortunate that sometimes that's how it ends up. There's also the adoption rate of DMARC, which I think you hit on, and I do need to point out. Currently, the adoption rate of DMARC among mail providers is under 10%, well under 10%, and that's just looking at the top internet providers. I can't remember the exact figure, but it's pretty miserable. It's tricky to set up, it's tricky to understand, it's tricky to process the feedback without paying one of the folks who supported the publishing of that standard. And I've got 5 minutes. No, that's fine. This is important context. My thoughts on it are DMARC offers a lot. The processing of DMARC doesn't have much to offer. There's not good open source tools for handling that feedback, and if there were, I think it would be pretty easy to have some good competition against those who get money out of this. So, if you're looking for a weekend project, DMARC feedback parsing, fun parsing project. It's only an email with a zipped attachment with XML. Yes. Ooh, really? Okay.
There's also an open source report handler you can sign up for.
Okay, I'm hearing there's open source report handlers and good ways potentially to manage this on the horizon. All right. Yeah, thank you. Any other questions?
What I said before, the 2005, I think you said it was, issuance of SPF was informational. No, it was experimental.
Oh,
But
so
it was reissued or issued in 2014 as standards draft. And the DMARC RFC is this information.
okay, that is an important distinction. So I'm hearing that my interpretation of some of these standards as published versus informational was incorrect, which thank you for bringing that up. I'm not going to be a champion at... yeah, it's good that someone's paying attention. Got to call me out where I'm wrong. I'm sure all of the details for these many RFCs are in, the various IETF areas where they're documented. And if you are interested in the years that any of these were published and informational versus actual, then the information will definitely be available to you. I think that's all the time I've got. 2 minutes. Ooh. One question.
I've heard that sender ID isn't really that important. SPF is more important than sender ID. But do you think there's any benefit for using sender ID if you're having maybe issues with delivery to Outlook?
The question is sender ID versus SPF. Depending on who you ask, sender ID is actually defunct now. But it's a controversial point. Sender ID did offer something, but its adoption rate is not strong enough to really hold a candle to what SPF has been able to do. SPF has a much higher adoption rate, in my opinion, because it's simple. and you can understand it. And while Sender ID adds more flexibility in what you can do, because of that, it's more complicated. So I guess my advice would be to stick to SPF. All right.
We're a very small company, half a dozen people have their own little domain that we didn't use a lot, just email here and there. Turning on DMARC was eye-opening. Because then we saw that spammers, because their domain happened to have the letters TV in it, which, great for marketing TV this, and apparently spammers were using his domain just kind of here and there, like one time a month, 1,000 emails would go out to different parts of the world using his domain.
Wow, that's
And
great.
it's just totally random. It's like they would just pick this domain sometimes and like use it.
Yeah,
so
so-
it was really interesting to get that feedback and see what actually is happening to your domain out there. It was quite open.
Yeah, thank you for that comment. So for those who can't hear on the other side, the comment is, it's really great to see what DMARC can do for
Even
you.
for
And
small
D-
companies.
there we go. I'm getting kicked off the stage.
I'm sure Katie would love to talk to all of you out in the hallway. Next talk will be in about 10 minutes, so stay put if you're looking forward to that.